Have you checked the children? You're a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King. That's easy, and obviously, bienvenidos. Welcome to the horror show. So very stoked to have you here for another bit of weekly worship, as I like to call it, with already being my personal favorite author, and I've been covering him for, wow, well over 300 crazy, interesting episodes over all of these years. And so this is actually one that has been just kind of sitting in the think tank for a hot minute because of the fact that I knew that we were approaching the 10-year anniversary of the release of a StephenKing.com exclusive webcomic. Yeah, that's right. And so this was released in installments for 8 weeks back in October of 2012. And so they were doing a Monday, Wednesday, Friday sort of thing, although I honestly can't say that I could understand why they decided to do it in said format, because they were really releasing like one pretty much page at a time 3 times a week. And so if someone is like, okay, I have to wait a couple more days before I can even get the next little bit of information and, you know, the story, but that story being The Little Green God of Agony. And this is one of my personal favorites from the collection, The Bizarre Bad Dreams. But this actually, as far as the story goes, it was initially released in 2011 in a collection called A Book of Horrors, and then it also got another release a year later for the Best Horror of the Year, Volume 4. It also had a Locust award nomination for Best Novella. Didn't win, unfortunately, but yeah, so this is a story that, you know, then obviously collected in this 2015 release, if I remember correctly. November of 2015 was when Bizarre Bad Dreams came out. But this is a very fascinating story, and just have to give a little bit of background information about the guy who wrote and illustrated this, because, dude, he is kind of a gangster when it comes to just having a very storied and awesome career up until this point. So, dude's name is Dennis Calero, and he's actually worked with like a lot of popular IPs as far as like existing properties and stuff like that. So he did some Sliders stuff, which was that great Jerry O'Connell show from the 90s that I love so much, and that I think they're trying to reboot it right now, or they're trying to do like some sort of legacy sequel or whatever. But he also did Magic the Gathering, obviously very popular card game, and loads of mythology within all of that. Kolchak the Night Stalker. I mean, these are all awesome, you know, just very noteworthy titles as far as popularity of horror and stuff like that. He also did a 28 Days Later comic book called The Aftermath. He did a version of Telltale Heart in 2013, and yes, obviously that being one of Poe's most popular tales, but I guess he is, from what I understand at least, most noteworthy for doing the noir stuff. So he did a X-Men noir comic book, and then he also did a Spider-Man noir comic book, so I mean, quite a career for this guy. He's also a Harvey Award nominated dude, but yeah, he handled the writing and the visualizing of this tale, and this has been one of my personal favorites, and you know, since it was, since I at least got the first encounter with it in The Bizarre Bad Dreams. And so The Little Green God of Agony is essentially about this guy named Andrew Newsom, if I remember correctly, and yeah, so he is said right off the bat to be the 6th richest man in the world, and yet he almost died in this crazy plane crash where everybody else did not survive this nasty encounter, but he did. He just had to get to that meeting in Omaha or whatever it was. And so, yeah, he has been at nearly 2 years at this particular point going through the physical therapy aspects of trying to rehabilitate, trying to, you know, just to get, as opposed to being bedridden, you know, which he has been since the accident. But he has his nurse named Catherine McDonald, and she's like basically his private nurse. She's making thousands of dollars, like $5,000 a week, just to, you know, do all of this certain like personal care for him. And she's like, yep, I'm just stacking those ducats, doing my thing. But yet she is also like frustrated with Newsom because of the fact that she doesn't think that he is putting the according work into the rehabilitation process. And she even says, like, early on in one of the first few pages, like, she's frustrated because she knows that these particular straps have to be incredibly tight for any, you know, sort of just aid and, you know, what they're intended for. But, you know, Newsom complains constantly, and he's apparently also dealt with all kinds of different, like, miracle healer sort of people, like charlatans, as she mentions like early on in the tale. And she's like, yeah, I have seen all of these different peeps come through the doors, and it's because of the fact that in her estimation, Newsom just does not want to put the proper effort into a rehabilitation. He, being a rich person, he just wants to throw money at it, and to essentially, like, he's like, give me a miracle cure, and, you know, as opposed to actually having to put the effort into it. And so she is like very gladly accepting of his money, but she doesn't think very highly of this rich idiot. And so as the tale begins, it is with this newest charlatan, as Catherine says in the particular tale, that has shown up to the Vermont home where he's been going through these different types of rehabilitation, albeit, you know, incredibly half-assedly. And Newsom's assistant, Jensen, is there, but he doesn't really play much of a part as opposed to just standing and observing until we get to the big finale, which I'm not going to spoil here specifically, but it's the most interesting aspect of the story, is the payoff, and whether the explanation that this guy by the name of Rideout gives. And so he's this preacher that has been summoned based on the fact that he has a notoriety for being able to expel that sort of, he says at one particular point, if I remember correctly, I don't heal, I expel. And so that's because he has convinced Newsom, as he does, you know, through the 24 pages of this, because, yeah, it was released in installments, as I mentioned, over those 8 weeks, but it really is just pretty much like a single-issue comic book is what the equivalent of it is, because it's just 24 pages, you know, there's about, like, 6 to 8 panels per page, and so, yeah, that's like a single one-shot sort of comic book. But Rideout basically decides to convince Newsom that there is this little green god of agony, this little demon of sorts that is actually residing in between the chest and the throat area. And that's the reason that he is incapable of actually getting through, you know, the proper rehab and actually getting back up and walking on his feet, because, you know, the prognosis initially was they're like, well, you are lucky as hell that you survived. However, you can get back to, you know, first walking on crutches and then eventually getting back to some semblance of, I guess, kind of functionality. And obviously, you can tell the King with his 1999 accident, there is a correlation between the story here and between, from what he has said a few times, he's like, I'm still in pain to this day. It's not like it ever completely goes away. And even though he's rehabbed and all that different stuff, but he had cages on his, and, you know, portions of his body and everything. So there's obviously just, he is speaking from personal experience about how it is very tough to, you know, get back on your feet, so to speak, in said regard. And also the fact that, you know, him being a rich person as well, you know, very well off from, you know, being one of the world's best-selling authors and everything, yeah, he probably was wishing that he could just quick fix it too. But unfortunately, there is an extensive process with regards to all of this, and so that's something to keep in mind. And so, yeah, you see where King derived the inspiration for this particular story. But it veers into fascinating territory as you are essentially trying to figure out throughout the tale if what this Rideout guy is actually saying could be possible. That the mystery and what is revealed to actually be going on at the very end, that is the big thing that just keeps you on the edge of your seat with this particular tale. And I gotta say, it's one of my probably favorite Stephen King short stories. Not all-time favorites, definitely one of the best from Bizarre Bad Dreams and from this collection and everything. And but yeah, I'd say it's probably top 20 maybe-ish for me. And I've done countdowns about short stories and stuff like that here, you know, various times. But this is one of the strongest and one of the least predictable of all of the tales. And as the story progresses and you're trying to figure out whether this little green god of agony, this little evil presence that has apparently left Newsom incapable of actually being able to, you know, properly rehabilitate, but it also delves into some aspects about the nature of pain, and it's some stuff that Rideout says about halfway through the story to the Catherine character, the nurse, and basically he's like, you have been doing this sort of work for so long that it almost doesn't faze you anymore. You know, the fact that you're turning a blind eye to this man's suffering because of the fact that he's rich and well off and, you know, just wants to take the easy way out sort of situation. But he does bring up interesting points to her. He kind of calls her out a little bit and is like, yo, you are essentially numb to the nature of his suffering yourself because you have been doing this sort of caretaking for so long that, you know, you almost are kind of degapped yourself. And of course, she just, you know, deny. She is not a fan of being, you know, called out in said regard. She's not not into it at all. But it does just propose an interesting theory about the fact that, yes, perhaps people who do this sort of work, there is kind of a just turning a blind eye sort of situation, or and he even asked her right out, this charlatan, this religious guy, at one particular point, he's like, have you ever really like suffered in your life? Like, what's the worst pain that you have experienced? And she's like, well, I fell out of a tree and broke my arm when I was like 11 or 12 or something like that. And he's like, yeah, that's the extent of your suffering, when this man was hurled from a plane and nearly died and all this other stuff. So it is it's a dynamic of this particular tale that I had honestly kind of forgotten about a little bit. Just the whole questioning of if you just get a little more insensitive, I guess, if you're in this line of work. And it's fascinating. And also the fact that right out, he presents himself as this like kind of ominous presence initially, but yet the Catherine, the nurse character, she very much just, she becomes fascinated with him, and she is wondering, just like the reader or the viewer in this particular case too, being a webcomic and everything, like, you are right there along the ride with her, and you're just trying to figure out, you're like, is this dude legit? You know, because he's saying some outlandish shit, but nonetheless, like, you are along with that journey, you know, just right there with her, and you're questioning, and you're wondering, you're like, is this guy for real? You know, is the outlandishness of what he is proclaiming, is that a possibility? And saying that, you know, he had actually done this process previously, and he, you know, he expelled a similar presence from this young girl, almost died in the process though, and that was the most recent time he had done it. He hasn't done it in a few years because of the fact that the doctors were like, yo, you're gonna have another heart attack, and it is quite possibly going to be the end of you if you try to do one of these procedures again, so to speak, one of these expulsion things. And so, yeah, like, the guy seems legit, but, you know, it's of that legitimacy of, you're still kind of wondering, because of how just wacky what he is saying, if in fact it is true. And that is the crux of the mystery within this tale. And yeah, it's the payoff is satisfying, you know, without spoiling stuff, yeah, as I said. But the artwork is very vivid. It reminds me a little bit of another comic book which was done. It was an adaptation from Just After Sunset of a short story called N, which, similar to Little Green God of Agony, it was almost of that novella length. So like, it's not your typical, like, you know, 15, 20 page short story. It is a little bit, you know, longer in the proverbial teeth, so to speak. But yeah, the art is, it's not of the cartoonish variety or anything like that. It is, I shout out back to his name once again, as I want to, Calero, man. He does a very solid job of adapting this, but really, if not for the artwork just having this almost photorealism to it, it would not, I don't think, be as effective of a story, especially with the spook factor and the aforementioned mystery and whatnot. And so, I mean, yeah, major props to him. And like, anytime you have somebody who is a part of the like entire process, so they're writing, in this case adapting, obviously, so it's not maybe as difficult as like an original idea, so to speak. But yeah, very well adapted. The dialogue, like, we're talking big thought bubbles, man. We're talking lots of not so much exposition, but explanation, maybe, especially from the Rideout character, as he not just with the confrontation aspect with the nurse that I mentioned, but also with just the plausibility almost of what he is saying, and the fact that he also has, like, you know, merit and seeming good intention behind even doing this in the first place. So Newsom, the you know, this billionaire, presumably, sixth richest man in the world, he's like, I'll pay you, you know, $10 million, $20 million, you know? So he's like, but only if you succeed, and only if you can actually, you know, truly take this thing out of me, and, you know, I can get back on my feet and be healed, and at least, you know, like, ramp up the speed of the process, so to speak. And he's like, no, I don't need $10 million, I don't need $20 million. He's like, all that I require is, he's like, a few $100,000. And then he gives this explanation as to the fact that back at his home, their church was unceremoniously burned down to the ground, and they're having to have like meetings in this like abandoned gas station now. And he's like, we are a large congregation, but unfortunately we are a poor congregation. And so that's why they can't go to somebody's house or anything like that, because there's just too many of them. And so the fact that he's like, all that I require is enough money to actually rebuild my church. And he's like, that's all I need. I require nothing more. And so he's not doing this out of greed or anything like that. He legitimately is, you know, just back to the wall, and that's why he is willing to put his life on the line, so to speak, to actually do this expulsion thing. So really, it just boils down to, you know, is he full of shizzle or not? That's really, and yet it keeps the tension high and it keeps you very interested. I will say, and I guess this is one of the only times where I have to go spoilers for a brief little second. I know I said I wasn't going to, but the finale and the payoff for this is in the printed page significantly superior for me in comparison with a choice that is gone for the visualization aspect of when we do see this thing. And it's described a lot more intriguingly in the source material. In the adaptation here, as I said, spoilers, pause or, jump away or whatever. But yeah, it's really just this like glowing green tennis ball-y manifestation. And so that's one of the only things I feel like was a little bit more lackluster with the adaptation here. But I'm going to give thumbs up now because I'm jumping out of that little spoiler bit. But yeah, man, I mean, I'm kind of disappointed that King didn't do more of these sort of experimental sort of approaches. However, with this being, I think it was around the same time that the original Dark Tower comics were being published and stuff. I don't think they had done N yet. And N was also originally like a motion comic sort of thing that was on iTunes. So this was when King was being experimental as far as just allowing different types of adaptations of his properties, and most notably in this case, like a lesser known sort of short. I will say though that this was also optioned back in, I think it was August of 2020, by Lionsgate, and they're saying they're going to make it into a feature film. The big thing is, though, as I have most definitely said various times, most recently, especially here on the horror show and Hail to Stephen King, is that at this point, because everything gets optioned, like right when it's released, it feels like by King, and just about every, well, at least as far as the noteworthy shorts and stuff like that go, like most of them have been optioned or are in some phase of, pre or, post or whatever sort of bit, but yeah, like everything gets scooped up and then not necessarily do we see these come to fruition. So it was being developed by a guy named Ian B. Goldberg, who wrote an exceptional script for The Autopsy of Jane Doe. He's most noteworthy, I guess, at this point for doing Fear the Walking Dead. So that's capable hands in my estimation, and the fact that this has a very cinematic quality to the storytelling, and despite the fact that it is all just a self-contained sort of situation where, at least in the webcomic here, and in the short story itself, it's just all this rainy, stormy night where the expulsion is transpiring. But yeah, you could extend it into a feature very easily, in my estimation. You could show the accident that Newsom gets into. You could, see the initial aspects of rehab and his reluctance to really put his due diligence and effort into it. So yeah, despite the fact that it's a very awesomely self-contained sort of story, this is most definitely one that I could easily see expanded upon into something lengthier, because it's got enough, within the source material and some of the things that are described and not shown. I mean, hell, you could even have the ride-out guy, like maybe you see that first expulsion thing. Although, I don't know about that, because of the fact that, it's really just the is he or isn't he sort of aspect of the storytelling here that really makes it as captivating as it is, on both the short and on the webcomic. So, yeah, guys, you can check it out for free at stephenking.com. So it's on his official website, and I'll make sure to do a link to it in the description box and everything below. But yeah, guys, for its 10th anniversary, Derps, Flags, released in October of 2012, and once again, I just don't know how people would have consumed it with any aspect of as much enjoyment as just having it all there at your fingertips, as opposed to having to wait a few days and over the course of a number of weeks just to get a new page, like a new single page of the story. So it's much more enjoyable with, just having the entirety of the finished product together. So that is my thoughts once again on the web adaptation, the web comic of The Little Green God of Agony. And if you want to check out the most easily accessible area for the source material, that is right here in the Bazaar of Bad Dreams. So I extend a grande gracias for anybody who is tuning into this today. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find more on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, obviously here on the YouTubies. And at the beginning of next month, in November, we are going to be doing a little bit of a double down for our book of the month, because it is anniversaries for both of these. Most notably, Blaze, the last of the Bachman releases technically, which despite the fact that it was a trunk book. And then also Rage, the first and in many ways most notorious of the Bachman stuff based on the subject matter and stuff. It's the only book that King has apologized for and that he thinks is in bad taste. And I know that later publications of the Bachman books don't even include it. And if you have that initial paperback, man, it is worth a pretty penny. I unfortunately don't have one of those. But yeah, so first Tuesday in November, that is when, again, that's going to be going down. Live show, very excited about that. Hopefully there are no scheduling difficulties because, yeah, the live book of the month stuff with some alterations of schedule for me right now with returning to school at Arizona State and some different job things that I've been doing. Yeah, it's been a little bit more difficult to do a live show. But yes, this pre-taped installment of Hail to Stephen King. It has been a pleasure, and yes, grande gracias once more, everybody, and yeah, until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sin amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I'm hoping we've been well met. We share more of this palaver sooner rather than later, and until that instance occurs, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King. Yes, most def, The Little Green God of Agony is great in its source material, but go to StephenKing.com and check out that webcomic. It's pretty rad.